Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. For today's video, I decided that I was going to focus on some childhood books that I really loved and ones that kind of, I don't know, just like stuck with me over the years that sort of helped shape my writing identity and my reading identity as well. So these are all books that just really stand out to me that I remembered very fondly from growing up, and in some cases have reread as an adult and loved just as much. So ever since I was a little kid, I've always been a bookworm, and ever since I learned to read, like quite early, pretty much everything I wanted to read about was spooky shit. I mean, it was about ghosts or witchcraft or murder mysteries, or if it was like nonfiction about true crime or something like that. Didn't really matter whether it was fiction or nonfiction, if it was fucking paranormal, parapsychology or anything like that. If it was about something creepy or horrifying or gruesome or something like that, and if it had like a really creepy or like grotesque looking cover, then all the better. I was snatching that shit right up, like ever since I can remember, from when I was maybe like 4 or 5 years old. So I was born in 1972. And I learned to read pretty early, probably about 2 or 3 years old. So I kind of like jumped ahead pretty quick in sort of like reading level. So most of the books that I loved growing up during the 70s were geared towards slightly older kids. So in today's parlance, it'd be like YA type books. Which 1 or 2 of them were actually intended for adults, but I didn't really know that then. I just kind of read whatever I could get my hands on. And most of these, actually pretty much all of these that I'm going to be talking about today, were published between the late 1960s and the late 1970s, with most of them late 60s to early 70s. I think there's only 1 or 2 outliers for like late 70s. So this is 10 books. These are kind of the ones that just first sprung to mind when I had the idea to do this video. However, like after I did the notes for this, I remembered like a whole bunch of other ones that I wanted to talk about, so probably there'll be like a couple more installments in this series eventually. So these books, as you'll note, are kind of like all over the place. I don't really know why that is, but I don't really have much insight into why these particular books stuck with me, and the hundreds of other ones that I read maybe didn't as much, but that's just kind of like what my quirky brain is like, and maybe they'll give some of you guys like maybe some kind of insight into why it turned out the way it did. So here we go. So this first book I want to talk about, The Face of Danger by Willo Davis Roberts. This came out in 1972, the same year I was born. I really don't have any idea why this little particular trade paperback made kind of like a lifelong impression on me, but it did, so here we are. It's not really, I want to say it's not really a horror story. It's kind of like more a gothic suspense thriller type mystery type thing. And this is the one when I was saying earlier that it's not really for kids. I'm pretty sure that this was not a YA. I'm pretty sure this was like a trade paperback aimed toward the adult market, as far as I am aware. I kind of came across it like when I was growing up, a lot of times, because we didn't have a lot of money, so a lot of times we kind of had to like live with relatives and stuff. So we lived at my grandfather's old house, which I loved. It was just like this spooky, spooky old house in Daytona Beach. He was something of a hoarder, my grandfather. And he had there was like this one room that was sort of like up, it wasn't in the attic, but it was sort of like a little room that wasn't really used, like up on the 2nd floor. And it was just filled with like piles and piles and piles of books. So little bookworm me, I would always just kind of like climb in there and like go through all the stuff and just like pick out stuff to read. And he didn't care if I did that. He would like give me books sometimes too if he thought that I found them interesting. So I thought that was kind of cool. So this book I randomly found like in a pile in my grandfather's house when I was a little kid. So this book, The Face of Danger, it's basically about this woman named Charlie, and she's kind of homely, and this was written in 1972, so it's not like super politically correct about how they refer to her. There's like, ooh, what an uggo. It's that kind of thing. They didn't use uggo, obviously, that's a modern term. But yeah, so they kind of go a long way into how, how much of a dog this poor woman was. So she's pretty homely. Now, she grew up as an orphan. I don't remember, because it's been a while since I've read it. It's kind of hard to get hold of, it seems like. But I don't know if her mom, like, she popped out the womb and, like, her mom sort of was like, nope, and just, like, put her in a basket somewhere. I don't know. I'm totally making that up. But yeah, so she grew up an orphan, like, and all that. So when she's 23 years old, she's in a car accident. And her face gets, like, really, really disfigured. So the plastic surgeons are pretty much, they're like, okay, well, that face is, like, super fucked up. We're just going to have to start over. We're going to have to start over. So they have to give her a whole, like, new face. And the new face that they give her is, like, strikingly beautiful. Now, it's weird because I don't know if, like, her whole entire face was fucked up, so they had to, like, reconstruct the entire face, or if it was mostly just her nose. Because I do kind of feel like if she just had, like, a fucked up looking nose, I feel like going, like, from super ugly to super beautiful would be, like, more than a nose job, but I don't know. Like I said, it's been a long time since I read it. So, and like I said, this isn't, like, a super believable story or anything, so just fucking roll with it. I also remember, one thing I remember, though, is that the attitude of the plastic surgeons were, like, kind of hilarious and, like, sort of, like, depressing at the same time. Because I'm pretty sure that they didn't ask Charlie whether they're like, hey, you want us to reconstruct your face, like, as close as we can to what it used to look like. They basically, seems like they just put her under the anesthesia, and then they were like, woohoo, upgrade, let's do this. You know what I mean? Like, without really asking her, which seems a little unethical, if not illegal, but, that's neither here nor there. I will note, too, that even before she was in an accident, like Charlie's big sort of, like, claim to fame, if you want to call it that, or her big, like, defining feature, even before she was in the accident, like I said, when she was still kind of an uggo, was she had this beautiful, long, white blonde hair. Like, everybody commented on it. Everybody in the fucking book, like, comments on this. She comments on it herself. It's, like, a big fucking deal. So I do remember that there was, like, a couple, like, she has a memory of one point of she'd be walking down the street and, like, some dude would, like, wolf whistle her from, like, behind, and then she'd turn around and he'd be like, oh, excuse me. You know what I mean? I thought you were attractive for a second. So there was that kind of thing. So I guess maybe that was why an impression, because I've, had a lifelong sort of struggle with, insecurity issues and stuff like that. So that probably kind of, like, struck a chord with me. I was like, oh, ouch, that would be, like, so fucking thing. But I have to admit that I was kind of, like, transfixed by this idea of this woman who had been, like, a kind of ugly, or like a plain Jane, suddenly being gorgeous, and she was kind of, like, thrust into this, into the world of the beautiful, the rich and the beautiful people. So I thought that was, like, kind of fascinating. I also thought it would have to be, like, really, really weird to look in the mirror and see kind of, like, a stranger looking back at you, even though if it was, like, a foxy one that, like, looked a lot better, like, who the fuck is that? You know what I mean? It would be really weird. Now, because Charlie now looks like this gorgeous heiress that some rich family on an island has either been looking for or suspects might exist. Like, it's the granddaughter of, like, the matriarch that just died or something like that. Like I said, I don't really remember it all that well. So she ends up getting whisked away to this remote mansion by this new wealthy suitor that she's got named Ross Dutcher. And when she gets there, it comes to pass that there's some pretty shady shit, like, going on with this Dutcher family, relating back to, it turns out that the plastic surgeon who fixed her face modeled her face on the matriarch of this family, or something like that, like a portrait that he had seen that happened to be like this woman. So obviously she's not related to these people. She just looks like that because the plastic surgeon was like, hey, I'm going to use that for a template, you know what I mean? But the family doesn't really know that. However, it turns out when some lost heiress just pops up out of the blue, like the boyfriend kind of brings it, like, hey, I found her, blah, blah, blah. Everybody else in the family is just like, great, let's kill her. You know what I mean? Because basically they want all the money, right? That's like all the grasping relatives. So from there, it's sort of like a murder mystery. Like, she tries to, they try to bump her off and all this other kind of stuff. Interestingly, like I said, I hadn't read this in years. It's kind of like I said, it's more a mystery thriller, like suspense type of thing. Almost kind of maybe a romance novel type thing. Because I remember being, like, really fascinated that all of this rich family, like, they had to put on, like, these fabulous gowns, like, to go down to dinner and stuff. I'm like, wow, that's awesome. And, like, it was, like, described, like, and I just thought that was, like, really cool. I don't know why. But yeah, fun fact about this book. Well, not really about this book, but indirectly. When I was researching this book, like, trying to remember a lot about it, like, so I could talk about it, I discovered that the author of this book, Willo Davis Roberts, also wrote one of my other beloved childhood books, which is not on this list, which might be on another one, but it was actually more a YA novel. Like I said, this one seemed like it was more geared toward adults, but they also wrote a YA novel called Don't Hurt Laurie, which was like a child abuse book, and for some reason I was really into that as well. I was kind of a weird kid, you guys. I just like reading, yeah, let's read a book about child abuse. It's awesome. But yeah, so The Face of Danger by Willo Davis Roberts. Kind of hard to get hold of nowadays, but still one of my favorite books from childhood. So this one came out in 1967, and it's called The Ghost of Opelina, or 9 Lives, by Peggy Bacon. This is one of those books, I think I checked this fucking book out of the elementary school library at least a dozen times, if not more. I love ghost stories, which most of you guys know if you've been here for any length of time, and I love cats, including my darling little Pookie. So a book that combines both of those things, that's going to be like, little nugget me is just going to be like, whoop, look at it, going to be sucked right to that. So The Ghost of Opelina, it's essentially like a frame story, right? It's about 3 kids, I think Philip, Ellen, and Jeb, I think are their names. And they move into this like kind of rambling old house. And up in the attic, they find, interestingly, a little talking ghost kitty. It's like a Persian cat. And the cat has like these really, really bright, like opal eyes, like really, really beautiful, hence the name Opalina. So she begins to tell them, like in each of the chapters, about all of her 9 lives and all of the people who had lived in the house prior to this new family, like all the adventures that she had with all of these families, like which ones sucked and which ones were, I can't remember exactly like what a lot of the stories were, but it was really cool. Like her story started, her first life was started in like 1750, I think it was. And then like she would jump ahead, like, you know, her next life. So she talked about like all the people that owned her, like over her 9 lives. And it was like super cool. Also, this book was illustrated. I don't think it was like super illustrated, but I think there were some illustrations throughout. And I think the author, Peggy Bacon, did the illustrations as well. And I remember those being really nice. Interestingly, I wasn't super into historical fiction growing up. But I guess this one was just kind of like irresistible to me because it was like ghosts and cats and I don't know, I just really dug it. So normally I wouldn't have read historical fiction when I was a little kid. I got into it like a little bit later. But I think this is like the main historical fiction that I really liked when I was growing up. But yeah, it's just because it was a cat telling it, I guess it was like cooler. I don't know what it was. But yeah, interestingly, when I looked this up on Goodreads, several people had talked about how this was like a beloved childhood book of theirs as well, but it appears to be out of print, and it seems like it's really, really, really hard to get hold of. Like sometimes you can find it on the secondhand market, but some of the people were complaining that on eBay, they'd seen like a copy on eBay, but it was like $200 or some shit like that. So it's really sad. I'd really like to be able to reread this one of these days, but you know, it doesn't look like I'm obviously not going to spend $200 on a copy, but it's really, really hard to get hold of nowadays, unfortunately. I don't know. So maybe it'll get republished nowadays. Who knows? But yeah, The Ghost of Opelina, it's a great book if you like ghosts and cats. So The Ghost of Windy Hill by Clyde Robert Bulla. That came out in 1968. And I'm sure there's been other editions of it since then, but the one I had, I thought it was like really cool because it was a little slim blue hardback, like it was bright blue. And I think I bought it from, I don't know if they still do this in schools, but like the elementary school, and I think maybe, no, not junior high, but I guess elementary school, like Scholastic, they would come like once a year or twice a year or whatever and do like a book fair. And, you know, they would set up all the tables and like you would come and like the books were really cheap and I'd be like, whoa, that was like, you know, like fucking dessert buffet or whatever. So it's like, I'd always like have some money and take it to thing and like I'd buy like a big fucking pile. That's where I got a lot of books when I was growing up. And this is definitely one of the ones that I bought because I was like, ghosts, yep, I just want all about that. So yeah, and I used to carry it around all the time. I really, like, aesthetically, I really liked that it was like a little hardback and that I really liked the blue color. I mean, I like the story too, but, you know, just from an aesthetic standpoint, I thought it was kind of cool. So the description of this book is there's this professor And he's kind of like, I don't think it's so much that he doesn't believe in ghosts, but maybe he believes in ghosts, but he's not afraid of them, or something like that. Or he's a skeptic. I can't really remember. So he moves his family into this house that's supposed to be haunted. And then there's like some kind of ghostly shit that happens, but there's also these really weird, creepy neighbors. And it's almost like those are like weirder and creepier than like an actual ghost would be. Now, if I remember correctly, and this might be a spoiler alert, I'm not entirely sure because I haven't read this in a long time. I don't think that there actually ended up being a ghost in the story. If you've read this like recently, and if you know what I'm talking about, like please correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that there wasn't one. Like I thought that they thought that there was, but then it turned out there wasn't. But it was still like really, really creepy just the same. I mean, I really, really liked the descriptions of like this old drafty farmhouse. There was this woman, like a mysterious woman in white. She had like a rag bag. She had like a bag of like all these sort of like fabric, you know, pieces of fabric that she did whatever with, made quilts or whatever. The neighbors were like this kid named Bruno, and he had like, I think his father was like abusive or something like that. I think those were like the neighbors that the kids were kind of fascinated with. And for some reason, I don't know why this sticks in my mind so much, but one of the things that I always think of, other than the woman in white with the rag bag and hanging the bells on the, or bells or something like that, like on the doorknobs, like just to know if the ghost came through or something like that. But one of the things that I remember about this was, this is the first time that I learned what a spring house was, because I had never heard of that before. And, you know, so I was like a little bookworm and I was like, what the fuck is that? So like, I probably didn't say what the fuck is that when I was a little kid, but well, maybe I did. I don't know. But so I said, well, I got to go look up what that is because I don't know what it is. And it's kind of like, I guess, you know, in the days before they had refrigeration, they used to have kind of these little, I don't know, these little structures that were made of, I don't remember what they were made of, like cement or something like that. And they were supposed to like keep your stuff cold, and they built them over like a spring, like a water, you know, water would go through the bottom of it. And it was, in theory, was supposed to keep your shit cold. So if you had milk or whatever, like refrigerated kind of stuff, you would put it in there like to keep it cool. And I was like, wow, I never heard of that before. But I don't know why that like in particular stuck with me, but it did, and that was one of the things that I always remember about this book. But yeah, just that and the whole like bells on the doorknobs and stuff like that. I really like that as well. So this one's called The Witches of Worm by Zilpha Keatley Snyder. This also came out in 1972, the year I was born, and this is also about kitties. Because pretty much anything that was about kitties that was like a horror story, I was just like, all right, I'm into it. So the main character in this is named Jessica, who's like I don't know, she's like 12 or something like that. And she hates cats. I don't understand that. I can't relate because cats are the best, but whatever. I guess we all have the right to be wrong, I suppose. But yeah. So she ends up finding this little hairless kitty. And she kind of grudgingly adopts him and names him Worm somewhat contemptuously, because I guess she finds him when he's still pretty little and he doesn't have any hair. I don't remember if she finds him like before gets furry, like when he's super young, or if he's like a Sphinx cat or something like that. But she thinks he's ugly and doesn't have any hair, so she names him Worm. But apparently there's more to Worm than meets the eye. Because not too long after that, Jessica starts acting really fucking weird. Like, as though the cat is possessing her and making her do, like, terrible things. So you're kind of wondering, is Worm, like, a witch's familiar? Is Jessica just, like, an asshole and she's just, like, projecting her sort of own unhappiness and destructiveness or whatever onto this, like, defenseless little kitty? It's sort of like a good, like, psychological sort of study. Now, what Jessica comes to believe is that Worm is possessed by a group of witches, one of whom is her neighbor, Mrs. Fortune. So Jessica even gets as far as, like, contemplating, like, I'm gonna kill that bitch. But I mean, she does like kind of pull back, like, holy shit, like, what is Worm like possessing me or something like that. Now, I don't remember if Worm actually was possessing her, like if Worm was actually like, you know, a witch's familiar, or if she was just a dick that was kind of like, delusional and was like blaming it all on the poor little cat. I don't really remember, but I remember this being really, really good. And actually, Zilpha Keatley Snyder has another one on this list like coming up. So I did like a lot of her stuff. As an aside, I think that this was the first audiobook that I ever listened to. And it was on a series of cassette tapes because I'm old. I got it out of the library, and it was like in this big, I mean, because back in the old days before Audible, if you got an audiobook, they had to put it on, I mean, you know, they had ones on vinyl, I think, but when they put them on cassette tape, obviously there's not a lot of time on a cassette tape, right? So for a book of any length, you know, it was a lot of tapes. So you'd go to the library and it was like this big fucking plastic thing that like folded out that had like all these little things with like cassette tapes in it, like fucking 12 of them or whatever. I don't remember how many cassette tapes this was because it's not a horribly long book. It's YA, but maybe it was like, you know, maybe 100 or 200 pages or something like that. But I don't remember how many tapes it was. Maybe 6. I don't know. But yeah, so I just thought that was kind of funny. And I specifically remember like checking this out of the library because I was like, ooh, it's on. I had read it too, but I thought it was neat that I was like, oh, I can listen to it as well. Like, so it's like I read it twice. So yeah, I just thought that was like a funny little thing for people that don't remember what audiobooks were like when they were on cassette tape. So one of my favorite book series growing up was The Three Investigators. This particular book, which is The Mystery of the Fiery Eye, came out in 1967. It's by Robert Arthur. Now, interestingly, he wrote a bunch of these. They weren't all written by the same person, I don't think. Robert Arthur wrote a bunch of these. And interestingly, I have some other books, like some of those Alfred Hitchcock horror compilations, which I'm kind of maybe mention one of those later as well. And some of his short stories are in there as well. So I've read some of his short stories, and I think he wrote like something about Jack the Ripper or something like that. But anyway, he wrote like a bunch of these. So yeah, so I was a big fan of the Three Investigators series. To me, they seemed much cooler than the Hardy Boys books. I read like a few of the Hardy Boys books, but they always seemed a little, and maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but they always seemed like a little goody two-shoes for me. Like the Three Investigators seemed like much cooler, like a little edgier. So even as a kid, I was kind of like Hardy Boys. I'm like, you guys are kind of lame. Also gotta say, I was a lot more into like Trixie Belden than Nancy Drew, although that's neither here nor there. That might have just been because Trixie Belden was like kind of like the off-brand. I kind of perceive it that way, that was like the off-brand Nancy Drew. It's like if you couldn't afford to get the Nancy Drew one, you had to get like Trixie Belden, you know what I mean? It was kind of like the Walmart brand of like, maybe not, but that's kind of how I remembered it. So the Three Investigators books, I mean, I think there were 43 books in the series, and I think I read them all at one stage or another, and some of them I read more than once, like some of them I owned, like I did have a little box set of them with like 4 or 5 of them, and then I would like check them out of the library or like whenever they came out or whatever. I think that the main reason I liked these, well, there was a lot of reasons, but I think one of the main reasons was I think I definitely felt an affinity with Jupiter Jones, who was one of the investigators, who was kind of this chubby smarty pants. In the canon of the series, he does like a dead-on impression of Alfred Hitchcock, and I think in one, I don't remember if it's in this book, but it might have been in one of the other ones, like Terror Castle or something, but he actually has to go to get in to see Alfred Hitchcock, and he goes to like the movie studio in Hollywood and like does the impression and like pretends to be his son, like to get in there. So I don't know why I remember that scene. Another thing I loved about this was the Three Investigators, their headquarters was, what they had done was they had taken this old trailer that was in, because one of their dads like owned a junkyard, and so there was this old trailer, and they set up their headquarters in there, and then they piled junk like all over the outside of the trailer, and then they had like all these different little like essentially little tunnels like going into it so no one could see it. And I thought that was so fucking rad. I was like, oh my god, that is so awesome. I wish I could do that, like live under. I'm sure it smelled really bad, but and I don't know how they got air. I didn't really think about it. Maybe they addressed that. I don't really remember. But anyway. So definitely like my favorites in the series were The Secret of Terror Castle, which I think was the first one. Mystery of the Screaming Clock was actually pretty good, and The Mystery of the Silver Spider. I think I owned that one, and I think I owned Terror Castle as well. But Fiery Eye was my favorite. I must have read that one like a zillion times. I guess because it was sort of about, they were trying to, the Fiery Eye was like this big ruby. And I've always been fascinated by gemstones. Not because it's just like, you know, not because I'm like materialistic or anything, but I just like find them really beautiful. And I'm kind of like interested in where they come from and stuff like that. So that kind of whole backstory with like the ruby was pretty cool. And also there was this whole plot point having to do with these sort of like cement or plaster busts of like all these historical figures like Francis Bacon and people like that, and I thought that was really cool. Like I remember that being like a big thing that I thought was kind of awesome about these books. But yeah, Mystery of the Fiery Eye, easily my favorite 3 investigators, but they're all pretty good. I don't know if they're still around. I guess you can still get them. I don't know if they're still in print or anything like that, but I mean, if you have a kid that's really like into mysteries and they don't really like the Hardy Boys or something like that, I mean, try the 3 investigators out, because I kind of feel like they're like cooler than the Hardy Boys. But maybe I might just be remembering that wrong because I haven't like read them for a long time, but you know, there's that. So here's another book by Zilpha Keatley Snyder, just like I promised. This is The Headless Cupid, and this came out in 1972. A lot of these came out in 1972. Same year I was born. I think this one, I want to say, I don't think this won the Newbery Award, but I remember it had like that silver thing on there. So I don't know, like a Newbery medal, because I looked on the Newbery medal site, because they still give those out, and I don't remember seeing this on there. But maybe they have like first place, or maybe there's other awards or something like that. But I remember this winning something. So I first heard about this book on this old PBS show with John Robbins. And I'm not really sure if any of you guys remember it. There's a couple episodes of it on YouTube. He had 2 of them. He had one called The Book Bird and one called Cover to Cover. And he would usually feature just kind of like 1 book, sometimes 2 books if they were short, on each episode. So I distinctly remember that there were episodes on like White Fang, The Witch of Blackbird Pond, The Sea Egg, Bridge to Terabithia, Tuck Everlasting. So what he would do was like they would take an excerpt of the book, like a few different excerpts of it, and someone would read it. And while they were reading it or narrating it, he would like draw this, you know, the scene. Like he would usually use, I don't think it was charcoal, but he would usually use like white pencil. It was just like a black and white, I feel like. I loved the crap out of that show. And I got a lot of like book recommendations that way for like, because he would always do like YA stuff. And like I said, I found a few episodes of it on YouTube, but the weird thing is there's episode lists of it, like, on the internet, but they don't mention the Headless Cupid, even though I'm sure that I saw him do it, because I remember him drawing the shit. And they also didn't mention Figs and Phantoms by Ellen Raskin, and I remember seeing that on there, and because I distinctly remember him drawing that as well. So I don't know. I don't know how to behave, because it's just like maybe I just like totally pulled stuff out of my ass and I'm just remembering shit that didn't happen. I don't really know. But anyway, The Headless Cupid, I mean, this had everything that little me loved. Those things being like weird teenage girls, possible witchcraft, and like a ghostly mystery like going on in an old house. So the story is about a boy, and his dad remarries, which introduces like a new stepmother into his life, as well as a very strange stepsister. Her name is Amanda, which is also my sister's name, matter of fact. And Amanda has like, she's like witchy as motherfucker. She has like a pet crow, which I thought was awesome. She had like these kind of like crazy, like her hair was like all braided and crazy. And she has this like mirrored triangle that she wears on her forehead. Like, I guess she's trying to like, you know, bring in, like, align her chakras or whatever the hell. But she was like super cool. Like, she was one of the aspirational figures of my youth, I think. I just thought she was like the coolest chick ever. The whole thing, like the house is like really creepy too. This is like a great fucking story. And I'm pretty sure this one's still around, because I think that I've seen like newer editions of this one. So yeah, this is definitely a good one if you have a, you know, a tween or something like that and they're looking for like mysterious, creepy witchcraft shit. I mean, this one's like really good. There's like a lot of occult stuff, like ghost, poltergeist activity, shit like that. So it's like a mystery. The Headless Cupid has to do with this that's like a newel post, like at the bottom of the stairs that was like a Cupid, and the head got knocked off, presumably by a poltergeist. So there's like a mystery around that. But yeah, I really, really loved this book. I don't know why I can't find the episode of Bookbird or Cover to Cover that featured it, because I'm pretty fucking sure that I saw it on there. That's where I got the idea to read it, but I'm sure it's out there someplace. So if anybody knows like where it is or can find it for me or something like that, I'd really appreciate it. So here's another book that came out in 1972, interestingly. And this one's called The Ghost Next Door by Wylly Folk St. John. Again, I can see you're probably like sensing a theme. Everything is like the ghost of something or other. You know what I mean? Now, I loved this book. I owned it. Like, I had like a little paperback. I think I probably bought it at the Scholastic thing, or one of my family members bought it for me because they know that I loved spooky shit. So I loved this book so much as a kid, but for a long time afterward, like when I grew up, I only remembered the cover and the general story outline, but I couldn't remember the title. And it was driving me crazy. And finally, I kept putting in like little phrases that I remembered, like of shit that happened in the book, like plot points in the book. And I finally figured out that it was called The Ghost Next Door, because it was driving me nuts that I couldn't remember the name of it. It's about this little girl named Sherry. And she never got told that she had had a half-sister named Miranda, who I think like drowned in a pond, like on this thing or something like that, at her aunt's house. I think it's her aunt's house. I don't remember exactly. Judith is like her aunt's name. So she moves there, and then like creepy shit starts happening, and stuff that has to do with, there's like a spooky, like a blue rose, you know how you can like dye flowers, which I didn't know that you could do before I read that book, and I was like enchanted by that, so I did it. Like I was like, holy shit, you can like think, and you know, if you don't know, like you can cut a flower and then like put it in, you know, water that has food coloring in it, and it'll go up the stem and it'll color the flower, you know what I mean? So there was kind of a thing where in the book, I think, where they had like these little white roses or some kind of flowers, something like that, and they would dye them blue, and they keep like turning up like around the house, and everybody's like, oh, that's some freaky shit, because that's what Miranda used to do like before she drowned, and it was like super creepy and everything. There was also this thing which was like a little cement owl that had like little marble eyes. I remember that. I don't remember, I think the ghost in this one did end up being real, if I'm remembering correctly, but this one was like super, super spooky. There was like a seance in it, which I love, and shit like that. But yeah, this is a really, really good one as well. I don't know if it's still in print anymore, but this is one that I would actually like to reread. So maybe I'll see if I can find like a used copy someplace for like $1 or $2, because it's just like a little, you know, it's just like a little paperback like that. And yeah, I really dug this one. Like there was a lot of sort of imagery about this one, like the little owl with the little marble eyes and the blue rose and stuff like that, that really kind of like stuck with me over the years. And I really, really liked this one a lot. It was like super creepy. So here's one that's kind of like a horror anthology, I guess, with short stories in it. Now, I was really into all those Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and then he would have like all these various authors like put short stories in these books, and he had like a fuck ton of different ones. I probably read them all. I actually own a couple of them, and I own like a hardback copy of this one as well. This one's called Supernatural Tales of Terror and Suspense, and this came out in 1973. Pretty sure this one's out of print. As I said, I still have one that's a hardback. I don't remember where I got it from. I think somebody bought it for me for Christmas or something like that when I was little. I have this one, and I have another one called Stories That Scared Even Me, which I found in my grandfather's house. That one is, I still have the hardback, but it's fucking torn up. The one that I have, the Supernatural Tales of Terror and Suspense, is actually in fairly good shape for as old as it is. Now, there are 11 stories in this one, and I read them like over and over. All of the stories in this are great. There's little illustrations and shit like that too. I really love the front cover as well, which is like a skeleton hand, and it's kind of like reaching up, and it's like a knocker, and the knocker has like Alfred Hitchcock's face. You know what I mean? It's pretty cool. I have to give this book props in particular for introducing me to what is one of my very favorite short stories of all time, which is called The Triumph of Death by H. Russell Wakefield, who is actually one of Britain's kind of finest writers of ghost stories. I feel like he doesn't really get a lot of play anymore. Triumph of Death, I would love to see a fucking movie made of that. It's just, I don't know, something about that like really struck me. If you've never read it, it's kind of about this kind of sinister older woman, and she lives in this house, like this creepy old house, with her companion, who I think is in her late 40s, named Amelia. And she's had like a whole bunch of companions, all of whom have like died of like suicides or heart attacks or things like that. It's very sus. And so basically the house is haunted, or apparently, but the whole thing is that it seems as though the older lady, Miss Pendleham, I think her name is Pendleham, she knows that the house is haunted, but pretends that it's not, just to like fuck with, because she's an asshole and she's like really cruel, and just to like fuck with her companions and sort of like drive them crazy. She's like gaslighting them, but it's like a really, really good story. But that story's in here. It's like the first one in here, and that's like probably one of my favorite short stories of all time. And it's not super long. It's just, I don't know why, it just like made a big impression on me. This one also has like some other kind of like really good stories in it. There's another story by H. Russell Wakefield called Mr. Ash's Studio, which is also really good. There's a story called The Bronze Door, which is kind of like a very rare like Raymond Chandler short story, which is also really good. Probably my second favorite story in there is called The Pram by A.W. Bennett, which is sort of like, it's not really like a haunted, is it? It's like a kind of a haunted like baby carriage sort of thing. No, that's not as dumb as that sounds. And there's also a really great story by Alex Hamilton called The Attic Express, which is kind of about this like model train, but it's like, it's really horrific and like really gruesome. But yeah, this was like a really, and like I said, I don't think this was necessarily aimed toward children, because the stories in this were pretty grisly now that I'm thinking about it. So I think this was kind of more aimed toward adults, I guess. But I fucking loved this as a kid, and I loved like all those Alfred Hitchcock anthologies. As I said, I've still got several of them. I think I have a paperback one too, like Rolling Tombstones or something like that. It had like a dumb like rock and roll kind of title or something like that. But I think I have that one, but I know that I have this one, like a hardback of this, and I read it a zillion times. This is probably the most recent of all of these, having come out in 1978 when I was 6 years old. And this book, I'm sure this is still around because this was a classic, and this did win a Newbery Medal the year that came out, and that is The Westing Game by Ellen Raskin. All of Ellen Raskin's stuff is great. I loved every single one. This is probably my favorite one, but Figs and Phantoms was good too. What was that one called? The Disappearance of Noel, or something like that. Like, that was good too, but this was like my favorite, and I've read it like a zillion times, and I have a copy of it someplace. I just couldn't find it for this video. It's not really horror, it's kind of like a mystery, and it's kind of like a puzzle story, which I love those. So yeah, what it's about, there's like a group of strangers, and they sort of get summoned to the reading of this will of this mysterious benefactor. Now, none of these people know who the fuck this dude is, or why he would be like leaving the money, like why they would be in his will. It's just like a bunch of random ass people, and they all get moved into the same apartment building to essentially like compete for the dead guy's fortune by figuring out which of them murdered the guy. That's kind of like the setup of the mystery. So the name of the apartment block is, like, the apartment building is called Sunset Towers, and it's on Lake Michigan. Yeah, it had been owned by this guy. He was like a self-made millionaire. He was like real reclusive. His name was Samuel Westing. He's just kind of like set up this whole, and I'm not gonna spoil the mystery because it's just like, it's so good, like when it's resolved. And I read this like probably like a few years back, because like I said, I bought like a because I think when I read it first time, I just like checked it out of the library, but I kind of bought like a used paperback of it, and it's still fucking great. I still had even though I know like how the mystery is resolved, like I know what the solution is, but it's just so great. Like, all the characters are so great. Like, I especially liked like the young girl named Turtle. I think she was because what they did was they split everybody into teams. So like Turtle was with this like older woman named Flora, and then but everybody got paired up, and they all got like this kind of a set of clues, and then they had to like figure out, you know, nobody really told them like what the fuck was going on or anything. They said, here, we're pairing everybody off, and here's some clues, figure it out, you know what I mean? And then whoever figures it out like gets the money. And yeah, so the characters are great and hilarious, and the mystery is just like really, really intriguing. I don't know if you'll be able to figure it out because you know, I already know what it is, so I can't really like read it from a perspective of not knowing what. So I don't know how easy it would be like for an adult to figure out, but I didn't figure out when I was a kid. I was just kind of like, oh, holy shit, that's like so clever. But yeah, I don't know. I think this has been adapted. I think it was adapted to like a TV film. Like somebody told me that this was adapted to a film, like maybe back in the 90s, I want to say, and maybe it was like for TV, but it wasn't called The Westing Game. It was called something else. I just don't remember what it was. But I really kind of wish they would do like a big budget adaptation of this. I think that would be so great, and I think this would be like really good. I think it's just like really cinematic, like a really cinematic story, and I don't know why they haven't fucking done it, especially like in the last few years when we've seen sort of so many like YA books being like so popular and like making, you know, they're making movies out of them like left and right. And you could even put it on a streaming service. You could even kind of make this a series, I kind of feel like, because the way it's structured, you could totally turn it into a series. I wish someone would do that. If anyone's listening that has the power to do that, please do it. It's like, I would totally watch it. But yeah, The Westing Game, like I said, all of Ellen Raskin's shit is great, but The Westing Game is my favorite, and I'm pretty sure that it's like the best one. Most people think it's probably like the best one. So, hands down, my favorite YA book of any era, and I don't see that change at any point in the future, is John Bellairs' classic, The House with a Clock in Its Walls, from 1973. I think I first read this when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, so maybe kind of like very late 70s or early 80s I must have read it. There was, I mean, it had everything, again, that, like, kid me was just really into. There's, like, a creepy old house, secret passages, randomly changing stained glass windows, witches, wizards, a hand of glory, which I was fascinated with those when I was a kid. I was fascinated with the hands of glory and, like, beheading and shit like that. Like I said, I was a weird kid. There's some light necromancy going on, like bringing people back from the dead, and kind of like a scary countdown to doomsday. One of the best things about this, and I feel like probably the new editions have kept this because it's so iconic, was that the illustrations for this book were done by Edward Gorey. And I think that it was this book, and I think like the beginning credits of that old show that was on PBS, like PBS Mystery or whatever. And remember that had like an animated beginning, and that was like Edward Gorey like animation. So I think PBS Mystery and this book was what sort of like turned me on to Edward Gorey. And I love fucking Edward Gorey. I have like so many, I have Amphigory, I have all of his like books, and I have like books about him. Like I have a book of his letters, and it's just like, I think he's like the fucking coolest. And so I think that this book was what started kind of my love affair with Edward Gorey's artwork. So everything about this book is fucking magical. I've reread this multiple times as an adult, and it holds up every single time. I will note that it's actually the first in a series. I think it's the Louis Barnevelt series, because that's the name of the main character, Louis Barnevelt, the little kid. I read some of the other ones. Like I have a hardback like right now of this book and the first 3 books. So it's this one, what's that one called? The Witch in the Ring, and I can't remember what the third one's called. And I liked those, but not as much as the first one. Like the first one just really it just was boom. It's like, I don't know. It's like, it was just everything that I liked, like I said. So every time I reread it, I'm kind of like taken back to my childhood, because I'm like, oh, I remember like loving this kind of thing. And it's like, so this is easily one of my, if you love like magical kind of shit, like I said, wizards and bringing people back from the dead and just like a creepy old house, and it's fucking great. I love it. So I can't really recommend this one enough. I wanted to live in this book, like when I was growing up. Seriously, I probably still would. Like if somebody said, hey, you want to live in a house with a clock in its wall? Sure. I totally would. I think that'd be totally awesome. Now, for a long time, after I read this book, I'm like, why doesn't anybody make a movie out of this? Why doesn't anybody make a movie? Finally, in 2018, they made like a big budget Hollywood adaptation of it, directed by Eli Roth, no less. You know, who, if you don't know, obviously does all those kind of like, well, he doesn't just do all torture porn movies, but he does like kind of like a lot of sort of more extreme horror. But he did actually a really good job. It's not, I mean, Jack Black was in it, Cate Blanchett was in it. It's not exactly what I pictured, like when I read the book, but it was good enough, like close enough, that I was kind of like, oh yeah, you know, that was like pretty fucking good. You know what I mean? I kind of feel like, I don't know, I think I'd like to see like an animated one. Is that weird? Like not like CGI animation or like 3D animation, like old school animation that kind of looks like an Edward Gorey drawing. I think that, I know nobody's gonna make that because I'd probably be the only person that watched it, but I mean, I think that would be super cool. But I fucking love this book so much. Everything about this book is just fucking magical. You know, if you've seen the movie and you like it, then you should definitely read the book, because there's a lot of stuff in the book that they sort of left out of the movie, or they just kind of like gave short shrift because, you know, they didn't have time to get into it. But yeah, the book is amazing, and I would absolutely recommend it. The other ones in the series I'm sure are good. You know, I read the second one and the third one, and I remember liking them, but I don't really remember that much about them because they didn't like hit me in the same way. But the first one is just awesome, and it's probably like my favorite YA book of all time. I don't really think anything's gonna knock it off that perch, so sorry about that. So that'll do it for these top 10 of my favorite creepy books from my 70s childhood. As I said, when I was doing the notes for this video, I actually thought of some more that I wanted to talk about. So eventually I'll probably do like more in this series. Like I might do another 1 or 2 videos along these lines, like talking about some other books that I remembered. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and remember to give me a like and a subscribe if you want to see more of this type of content, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.